Hi, I'm Ashlyn Meza, and I will be presenting to you the case study of the 2008 Pacific Northwest snowstorm. So what happened? Well, in the Pacific Northwest, we were hit with a few snowstorms about a decade ago, 12 years ago, and this broke a 44-year-old record with up to 28 inches of snow. Now, this number varies depending on where you live. I'm assuming that this is the highest that the snow got in all of the Pacific Northwest, because in Portland it really ranged in the 24 inches margin from all of the websites that I gathered my information from. So I'm assuming this is like Seattle or something, because Seattle's further up north and was able to collect more of the snow and further, well, I don't know if it's any more further west, but probably just an area further west and north. And the temperatures were in the mid-teens, so for us that's cold. That's pretty cold. And the snowstorms need cold air and moisture, and usually there's enough moisture here in the Pacific Northwest, but it's too warm, which you're thinking mid-teens, really? That's too warm? Well, no, it's not too warm. That was just the right temperature for this, because even when it's cold enough, it's too dry, but because we had enough moisture in our air and we were hit with a cold front, a low pressure area coming into our system, we were able to create a snowstorm. Well, not us, but the clouds created a snowstorm. And here it shows the last 14 winters of snowfall in Portland. So in 2003 and 4, in that winter, we got about 12 and a half inches, which is about half of 24 and a half inches. So that's really the only comparable year to 2008 in the past 14 winters. And even that's not comparable, because once again, it's like half of 24, so. And then this shows recent snowstorms, which 2004, that's not really recent, that was like 15 years ago. But the most snow ever in one day was 14.4 inches, and the last storm in December 20th and 21st in 2008, we got 9 inches. So, I mean, that's pretty comparable to 14 and a half. Not quite, that's about 5.5 inches off, but still, you know. When did 2008 Pacific Northwest hit? Well, it hit, of course, in 2008 on December 14th, roughly around that area, because of it just depended on where you lived, really. And it lasted over a week in some areas, you know, the 14th through the 22nd. Here it says the 16th, but once again, depends on where you live. This is more of when the low pressure system came in, and this is more of when the storm really hit. And there was a trio of storms, the 16th, the 18th to the 19th, and the 21st to the 22nd. And this is at Macy's in downtown Seattle, and this is right before the snowstorm hit. I mean, it's hitting right here, but it was before it got really crazy, because you can see people walking around, see the bottom of the lamppost, and that's a car swallowed up by snow in Oregon. Who and where did the Portland 2008 snowstorm affect? Well, it affected more than these areas. It affected Astoria, all along the Columbia River, Camas, Washougal, Vancouver area, not just Willamette Valley, Portland, and Seattle. It really just affected all of the Pacific Northwest, more or less. And once again, more in some areas, less in some areas, and just a variety of days. Schools closed, highways were closed, districts weren't sure how to make up school because school was canceled for about a month. You know, a lot of December was closed. How did the snowstorm occur? Well, the Pacific coast was hit by a low pressure system, like I've been saying, and it allowed Arctic air into the Pacific Northwest, and the temperatures were in the high teens, low 20s, or mid-teens for that matter. Once again, I'm sure it just depended on where you lived, and if you were further west, then you probably got more of the mid-teens, and further east you got more in the low 20s. And the Pacific Northwest precipitation is high, and I think even though it's warmer here, we were able to get a lot of snowfall because of the cold air from the Arctic occurring. That's not usually why we get a lot of snow typically, because we just aren't cold enough. And so here it shows the precipitation right here. It shows we have warmer air, but because of the coldness, we're able to have a low pressure system and it creates snow. So here are 5 millibar maps, and this is on the 14th, roughly around when the first storm hit, more or less. And here's the low pressure system right on the border of Canada and Washington. And here on the 18th, it's even lower than before, more getting to Washington area, more in Olympia. And here's the 22nd, and it's even lower, even more down south than before. And here in the surface weather maps, it's showing the low and high pressure areas and the cold and warm fronts. And so you can see the cold front right here and the low pressure area. And this is on the 14th. And on the 18th, you can see that the cold front is kind of backing away now, but the low pressure area is it's more on Washington here. And you can see here on the 22nd, this was the day after the last storm hit. So the low pressure area is still there, but you can see a warm front right there, and the cold front's kind of backing off a little bit. So you can tell that this snowstorm's kind of over now. It's kind of gradually coming to an end. And my mom's perspective, I didn't remember much of this because I was 5 when this happened. So I asked my mom what she remembered, and she said there was snow, ice, and school was closed for almost all of December. Snow was so high you couldn't tell where the sidewalk or road was, and we spent lots of time sledding. Stores weren't open, I-84 was shut down, semi-trucks couldn't get products to grocery stores. And here are my 2 older brothers and I sledding up the hill across our street, and that picture's up there actually, I don't know if you can see it. But, so here's me and my 2 brothers and whatnot, and we're playing in the snow in the field across our street. So in conclusion, the Pacific Northwest was hit with a snowstorm back in 2008, and one of the snowstorms that's been most memorable in even the past century. I know there's been some really big snowstorms in the past century, but this has been one of the more recent ones because those were back in the mid-1900s, and this affected basically the majority of the Pacific Northwest, but more namely Seattle and Portland, just because those are bigger cities, so we heard more about it in those areas. And this is because of a low pressure system bringing in Arctic air, so because we had so much moisture, and even though it's a little warmer here, the cold air was able to create a snowstorm. And the maps really show this because the 500 millibar and surface maps really show this because it shows the low pressure area and the cold fronts really hitting the Pacific Northwest. And I wish I could see more people's perspectives on this, not just my mom's, because I would be curious to see how it did affect other people's lives in the other areas that we live, because I know even though we all go to Clark College in this class, people live in so many different areas, you know. I mean, some people live in Portland, and I live in Camas and whatnot, so I'd just be curious to see how it affected other people in other areas. And thank you for watching my presentation, and I hope you enjoyed. And here are the cited sources of my information and the cited sources of my images.